few days ago, Uganda, particularly the unit of the police under the intelligence, they have received threats of a potential terrorist attack from the Al-Shabaab. This takes us back to at least 10 years ago in 2010 when the Al-Shabaab attacked people in Chadondo and killed numerous of Ugandans who are enjoying the World Cup. So today we are talking about countering violent extremism, the youth perspective or the students' perspective. So joining me to unpack this very critical and timely conversation is a panel of distinguished ladies and gentlemen who will help us put context to the conversation, but also give us an insight on what violent extremism is, the various laws that are there, but also how we can go ahead and counter violent extremism. So in no particular order, I'll begin from my extreme right. I'll let the gentleman introduce himself up to my immediate right, and then we can delve straight into the conversation. Benji, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Drake. My name is Emor Benjamin, law graduate of Makerere Law School.
All right. We're happy to have you here, and soon you'll be an advocate.
Yes, soon.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
The young lady on the show, most welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Atim Patricia. I'm a student of Uganda Christian University. So happy to be here.
Very happy to have you here, team, and looking forward to having a thrilling conversation. Mr. Jones.
Yes.
The name sounds so whitish, but go ahead and make a quick introduction.
Thank you so much. My name is Kashemire Jones. I'm a student leader at Makerere University, pursuing a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you here, Jones. So, as I said, in no particular order, but now I'm just going to start with Emor and understand the conversation, but first of all, get a perspective what violent extremism is. But besides understanding what violent extremism is, the people outside there would like to get a context. Why are we exactly discussing how to counter violent extremism in Uganda and beyond? Benji, over to you.
Thank you, Drake. So it's a very wide topic to discuss. It employs a lot of different concepts, different laws. Just before the cameras went on, you were educating me on transitional justice. So the extremism and violent extremism is wide, and it has been part of us for a very long time. Violent extremism, I would say, is simply employing or using violent means to achieve your ideological beliefs. So when you look at right from biblical times, there's been extremism in terms of defending the faith. When you look at, you go down in history, you look at the different revolutions that have taken place, there has been a resort to or extremism in order to counter the different forces within that necessitated the revolutions. When you look at the civil rights movement in America, there was use of violence deliberately against the white man. And one of the proponents of that, or one of the key figures in that, I would say, was Malcolm X, who believed that, if you do wrong to me, I would sort of do wrong to you. So there's so many examples. In Africa, you talked about, of course, terrorist attacks in Uganda in 2010, in Kenya as well, where we had Westgate. Yeah. It was the Westgate scandal, right? Yeah. Westgate terrorist attack, rather. Then we have, Africa, different examples. There are actually so many. So that's a introductory picture of what violent extremism is. You wanted a broader...
Yes, the context in terms of Africa, but then also Uganda.
Yes, so when you look at some of the reasons for violent extremism in the different places I've mentioned, most of them stem out of necessity. And it takes me back to the quote by an Italian political analyst, Niccolo Machiavelli, that the end justify the means, or the ends justify the means. So depending on what side you sit of that debate, you can apply that logic to violent extremism. That look, we have to do what we have to do in order to achieve justice, in order to achieve equality, in order to achieve, in order to end corruption, in order to, pursue gender equality. So that's how you can look at it. So there are other people who believe in the means that, look, for us, we respect, we do not see the need for people to die in order for us to achieve our means. Now, the funny thing about extremism is that there's a certain context to it. When you look at terrorism vis-a-vis wars in general, terrorism in terms of numbers has not led to as many deaths as wars have. And yet, at least from the media's perspective, and you could even start with looking at Ukraine and Russia, there sort of seems to be, it's sort of okay for us to go to war with a nation, for a nation to go to war with a nation, but it's not okay for terrorists to use violence to achieve their means. So there's also a need to understand what inspires violent extremism from that context, that there could be foreign interference in some of these instances. When you go to Libya, there was already, dissatisfaction with Gaddafi's rule, but there was also a hand, an invisible hand, that led to violent extremism, that fueled violent extremism. So that's sort of maybe the picture I can paint about violent extremism.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, so let me just get to you, Patricia. Understanding the context that Emor has given as to what violent extremism is, but also painting a picture exactly what it entails. Let us now look at, the conversation today is looking at youth perspective, student perspective. There are definitely young people in the continent, but also in violent communities are usually oftentimes used as people who propel these ideologies. They're either used as the people who are fighting, the people who go ahead and carry out these bombings, oftentimes and not, the young people. So what are those root causes of youth radicalization that propels this violent extremism?
Thank you so much for that question. I would like to focus on the aspect of the youth perspective. In Uganda, as is, the youth make up the majority of the population. That means that in case of violent extremism, these are the numbers that will be affected. When we see the youth being indoctrinated into these acts, the key term here would be indoctrination. How are they brought into this? Most of them are brought from birth, trained, and they have not gotten the other side of solving issues outside violence. So I would not per se put the blame on them because of the lack of intent. When we're looking at violent extremism, there are factors that we're supposed to consider. This includes, it has to be a criminal act. There should be an intention to either take a hostage or to cause death or injury. And these attacks are against civilians. Now, who is a civilian? All those are questions that could be asked. These are people who are not taking part actively in combat. So the perspective on youth, of the youth engaging in violent extremism is really complex.
All right, so then how about, because as I've rightly termed it, young people are oftentimes the ones being used in active combat. They're either the ones who are propagating the ideologies of the people behind the scene. So, for example, you see you have armed groups like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, the jihadists, among others, oftentimes use young people as their army. So what are those root causes of radicalization? How do they easily win the young people's hearts to join such groups and join such movements? Because in my opinion, I would look at maybe 3 particular ways. You look at the socioeconomic factors such as unemployment, poverty, among others. Just expound on that.
All right, thank you so much. That question is targeting more on the aim. What are they after?
Yeah.
Now, these violent extremists are always after sending a message. And the best people to send a message are actually the youth, because they are very impressionable and easy to mold to their ideals. So you look to, now the question would be, what are their encouraging factors? If you look at the economic system, if you say the best way to send a message that we are suffering, let's teach the youth how to kill some people. Either way they will die, that's collateral damage. Those are economic factors. Some people do it out of the pleasure of seeing people die. You know, some people actually don't have reasons why they engage in this act. So indeed, yes, the reasons are multifaceted, from economic, social, and political. Other people do not like the people in power. They're like, these violent acts could overthrow a government and they would come onto board.
All right. Jones, just like where Patricia has ended, I would like to understand more root causes, particularly from the angle of education. Africa is largely plagued with first of all, a vast number of youth. But besides the vast number of youth, if you use Uganda as a case study, majority of our young people are either receiving poor quality education or no education at all. Now, all those are foundations that are used to, first of all, radicalize young people to join extremist groups. Let me use an example. In Mali or Burkina Faso or Niger, that are in the Sahel region, the young people in, let's say, for example, Mali, who come from very poor backgrounds, who are unemployed, are oftentimes swayed away by the jihadists who come with ideologies that we are offering you economic gain, we are offering you a purpose. Because one, they lack the proper education to inform their ideals and principles in life, to stand firm and to stand firm in their ideals, to say no to violence, among others, oftentimes fall prey. So I want you to help us understand how education plays a key role in trying to counter violent extremism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Drake. Once again, I'm Kashemire Jones from Drake University. I would like to, first of all, send greetings to all Drake University students. And I jump into the discussion of today, looking at how education can help us in solving such violent extremism and radicalization. First of all, I would want to first say that our education system, generally in Africa, once you mention Sahel state, I will not look at Sahel state alone. I will look at Africa in general. When you look at Africa in general, the education system, it is just a symbol, but without substance. What do I mean? If you look at people who introduced education here, the likes of Immanuel Kant, these were racists, these were white supremacists.
Bro, isn't that a very
Extreme
expression? Yeah, to go ahead and term such people as, you know, I know it's your opinion, yes, but isn't that too extreme a description?
No, I don't think so, because we are having a discussion on facts and numbers.
Okay.
So unless you're telling me that I should not speak the truth that is there, that the world knows.
Give us those numbers.
Let me continue with my submission where you jumped in from. When you look at the system itself, it does not teach the youth to become like the way these people are. It actually teaches these people, the youth in Africa, to keep on looking up to these people, to serve them. So the education system that you're talking about, that it can help, in my opinion, I think the education system cannot help, because we are having an education system where we are being taught what to do and not how to create what to do. So in my opinion, still I would say the education system that you mentioned, it cannot help us in mitigating these issues here, unless we go back and we look where we went wrong, and then we solve that problem from there. I believe in education, but not the current education that we are having. I would say, if you look at Uganda in general, like she has said, Uganda, its population, the majority are the youth. But if you look at the employment rates for the youth are still unemployed. The numbers are there. These are the facts. These are the people, at the end of the day, they will come out and they start rioting about corruption, unemployment, no medicine in the hospitals, bills, electricity bills are going high every day. So in my opinion, as an individual and as a person who is still in school, I would say the education system, for sure, it does not help us solve such issues.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Benjamin, two key factors that have been brought up. Patricia mentioned that we have issues to do with poverty and unemployment. I asked him a question on how education can be a critical role in help us counter violent extremism. I would like to rely on those two causes. One, poverty and unemployment, which falls under the socio-economic factor, but then two, education, which falls under the social factor. But primarily, as we're looking at those two issues, first and foremost, I think the major issue here is education. Education is key in trying to form ideologies of people. And many African countries do not have the capacity or lack the capacity. I would speak for countries in sub-Saharan Africa, countries like Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, who are plagued with, first of all, minimal resources to provide quality education for all its citizens. Now, you have, for example, in DRC, where very many young people are not accessing quality education. They're being radicalized into joining armed groups and rebels and propelling violence in the region. You go into Somalia, you also have young people being taken into these various armed groups. You then move maybe into the Sahel region in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Young people who are not receiving quality education, being brainwashed and given ideologies that propel violent extremism. Education therefore shows that it has a critical role in forming people's minds and forming people's ideas. So how can we help the youth of Uganda, East Africa, and the continent in, first of all, promoting peace and security and doing away with violent extremist ideas?
Thank you, Drake. This discussion is very important for where we are now as a country, because unemployment and poverty you don't need to convince me to do much wrong when I'm unemployed and poor. You don't need, there's not much convincing you need. I mean, all you have to do is maybe offer me some money and I'll do anything you want. And this is the problem across all instances of violent extremism. If you look at the Arab Spring, one of the similarities across was high rates of unemployment and poverty. When you look at the Middle East and its issues with violent extremism, same thing, unemployment, extreme poverty. So I think the issue there is that, if I cannot afford what to eat the next day, but certain groups are offering me money to participate in a certain ideology, then why not? You look at Osama bin Laden and Afghanistan. They had a lot of resources, and these are the resources that they used to be able to commit the attacks that they did, paying different groups of people or offering their families or threatening their families in order for them to participate in violent extremism. So if someone is going to school, and if someone has what to eat the next day, they'll think twice before they can participate in such acts. Then education. I do believe education can play a certain it can help to mitigate. But people would have to be in schools first. And in most of these societies, if you look at, I've forgotten the actual numbers, but when you look at the number of people who continue, I think cross from P7 to S1 and those, in other words, in summary, there's a lot of the high levels of dropouts. So those dropouts are the ones that would be able to participate in violent extremism if we're going by the different patterns we have looked at. So for education to be a factor in countering this, people have to be in schools first. And I do not think education is the thing that will, it's one of the mitigation ways and measures, but it's not the mitigation measure, because it presupposes that everyone will be in school and everyone, you know, you can go to school even when you're hungry. You can go to school when you don't have school fees. You can, and those are the reasons that would push someone to participate in violent extremism. But I do believe it does help to, you know, to educate people about, for example, if it's the genocide in Rwanda, about the gruesome acts that were committed there. If it's about, you know, our own history with, you know, the Bush War. If it's, you know, just telling people, World War, reminding people that they dropped nuclear bombs in a certain place, you know. I know we're looking at violent extremism more in the context of terrorism, but it also does stretch to, you know, basically using violent methods to achieve your ideological ambitions or goals. So it does include waging wars against people. It does include bombing people. So I think education is a bit limited in that regard. But I think the first thing that any person would look to do to mitigate this is to ensure that each and every child, each and every home has something to eat, and each and every home has a means of making money, and then you can start to educate people. And
I hold a different view, though. I think both can be done concurrently. Education and making sure people are employed and having a source of livelihood is key. When we are talking about having, let's say, achieving agenda, the African Union agenda of Agenda 2063 of sustainable peace, prosperity, for us to have that peace, the sustainable peace we talk about, the prosperity we talk about, of course it entails economically empowering people, making people have what to eat, but also it entails informing people's minds and ideologies. So in my opinion, I think all can move concurrently. You make sure governments are in position to provide people with employment opportunities. The government is in position to provide people with the basics that they need to prevent themselves entering into extreme violence. And then educate the young generation, which is very key and very important. If you have a generation growing not knowing their history, their violent history, for example, us here in Uganda, we have had a very tumultuous history, a history plagued with extreme violence extreme political violence. We have not had, for our history doesn't show any peaceful transition of power, does it? It doesn't. Even the current government came in power by the means of the gun. And that just tells you, and how many lives were lost in that period alone, just from the period of 1980 to 1985 when there was the guerrilla war. Do we have the exact numbers? No. Now, us understanding, or us people being educated about that violent history, not just touching, say, this in this period we had President Museveni enter in power, and this, that's not enough. Memorization is very important, and I feel that's what most of our education systems lack. For us to counter violent extremism, we need to have all those aspects and all those critical areas embedded in our systems. Otherwise, we can have the money and still be violent without having the memory.
That's true, but let me just chip in something there.
Yeah.
You know, educated people can also have violent positions, violent extremist positions.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing, because I'm not sure about the history of Osama bin Laden, but he was well educated, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was in the United States.
He was an engineer.
He was an engineer,
yes,
from the United States. But he has, you know, this is him having a violent extremist position. There is also a factor of, okay, I didn't want to push it here, but if you look at the reason why we went why we also had well, I wouldn't say violent, why we resorted to violent means in pursuit of change of government, was because of a trend of revolutions. And the people that usually headed these revolutions were intelligent people, were well-educated people. So I feel like the need spawns more from, you know, when there's necessity for something, when you need something badly, when you don't have what to eat, when you don't have, I think that pushes you more than if you have an education or history of the activities in the past. I'll give another example. If today, and with the social media we have, well, let me bring it down to the smallest level. If there's an attack on your family, let's say whether it's abuse or whether it's a hostage situation, whatever the case might be, your first instinct is to try and do all things possible to save your family. And sometimes that means being violent, or sometimes you're pushed towards violence. Now, what it comes back to is that thing of the ends justify the means. Is it in order to achieve our objective, some people have to die, and is it necessary that
that is
some people have to die?
what forms violent or armed groups, because they have an idea of this perfect society they want to create. So it won't matter. The end will justify the means. So they're looking at the end. It doesn't matter what means they're using right now. It doesn't matter how many people they kill.
Yes.
Because if, for example, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Shabaab was against the idea of having a Western-backed government in place. So they do not care how many people they kill or how many lives are lost. What matters is they have someone from Al-Shabaab who is going to come ahead and push Islamic values, who is seated in power.
Yes.
So the means to get to the end wouldn't matter to them.
Yes.
Yeah?
You can also use the current Gaza situation.
Definitely.
Israel taking on an extremist sort of approach to try and stamp their point, to make their point.
It's all right. Let me just quickly engage my sister Patricia, and then I come to Jones. Social media, very powerful tool in, first of all, being a root cause, but also being a solution at the same time. So this question will quickly run to both of you. You've seen the influence that social media has had, first of all, in propelling ideologies, in even informing people's thoughts. People would argue that you have the traditional media that fronts its own agenda and informs people's ideologies. There are conversations that certain media stations push a particular narrative and a particular ideology. Some people say if you watch this station, you would get the actual news. If you watch this station, you get the actual news. Now, that just tells you the role that social media, but also media, plays in, first of all, informing people's ideologies and pushing on the possibly violent extremists of violent extremism actions. The recent Ukraine Russia war showed that. The current ongoing Palestine and Israel is also showing that.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on social media being a critical tool?
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. Social media is a very critical tool. Most people, it always slips their mind that social media is based on a creation of facts.
Yeah.
People curate it to push the agenda they're trying to portray. Someone would be like, my niche is being rich, my niche is having educational expertise on a specific subject. Yeah. So whenever we're getting any information from social media, we should get it with two thoughts at the back. One, always go back and verify the information that you're getting.
But people really verify that information?
Now, that would be up to the end user, because it's already open knowledge that the people bringing in this information are bringing it for a specific goal. So we cannot always blame social media to be the root cause of all evil, because in as itself has come with its advantages, faster communication, education. Yes, we can admit that these violent extremists could push their agenda better through social media, since it's very practical and faster. But however, as the end user, it's up to you for your own safety to also know the kind of information you consume.
Are you aware that upon the death of Osama bin Laden, the messages that he had, remember his court session when he was saying, he was ranting in Arabic, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar.
No, that was...
No,
It's Saddam.
Yes,
Saddam Hussein.
Yes, thank you. Saddam Hussein.
Yes, that's Saddam.
Do you know how many people were bought into the idea of Saddam Hussein, seeing his court trial and him shouting, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar? Very powerful.
Yes.
Do you think the end user who has seen the message of Saddam Hussein ranting would go ahead and verify that information? Because they have seen it. and also they've also had other people pushing the message.
For your specific example,
Yeah.
since it was an authentic tape, that's different because it now doesn't need a.
Yeah.
But I really do understand the power of social media is so strong.
Can I give you a very funny example?
Yeah.
If you want to understand the power of social media, just look at the opening of Chinatown recently.
Definitely.
And look at how many people flooded. And they did that, once the first group of people went and saw the prices, they were quickly disseminated across social media, and then people decided to flood. That's how quickly a country can be turned over. That's how quickly forces can be mobilized.
And just as recent as that, we have received possible threats of a terrorist attack from Al-Shabaab, which is also, anyway, the power of social media, which still reinforces your point.
Yes, but it remains a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Because if you're to, let's say, an instance where social media is deemed bad and shut down, if you're blocking the communication of these extremists, how will you communicate to the civilians that there will be a bombing in this area? Are we also going to bring it to light that this information, these alerts that are coming out is due to the virtue of social media's existence?
Definitely not. Powerful. Jones, you paid attention to the nudity, by the, how should I term it, the nude protests by our fellow young people against the fight against corruption. Some people received it with negative comments, others received it with positive comments. And someone could argue that that is an extreme end, though not violent, but extreme. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I want us to, because if social media was not there, we would have not known such that happened. So first of all, we need to first appreciate the work that social media has done today in our lives. But after appreciating the work it has done, we also need to look at the negative effects. Okay? People who protested about corruption of recent, you might not believe in demonstrations, but your daughter is there doing so. You get my point?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, this daughter of yours, what she's demonstrating about, it is not bad. If I may pose a question, what they were doing bad? It was not bad. But the processes, however much it is peaceful, but the actions they did, not all of them, a few of them, the actions they did in their demonstrations, I think other people to say that it did not look good, it was based on the actions that we saw through social media, through news, on televisions, and of course, at the end of the day, the government will come and say, like what Museveni said, President Museveni, what he said about the Kenyans. Those are just TikTokers. So on the actions you use to mitigate a certain challenge can result into people in power to listen to you or not to listen to you based on what they did. On another hand, the other section of people who are applauded, yes, what they did, how they advocated, how their fight against corruption was conducted. Yes, I applaud those ones. However, these ones that you've mentioned, in my opinion, there were many of them. Like there is my sister you saw during that period, who removed, I think she removed her brows. Was she on the street or in the courts of law when she got arrested? And at the end of the day, you fought a good fight. But what you've done at the end, how are we going to justify what you've been doing? were you doing it for the greater good, or you were doing it just for yourself, based on what you've done at the end?
That's quite debatable, because if you look at the message being propelled, because it doesn't matter the means to the end. What matters is the message that they're trying to propel, which I think oftentimes that is something people neglect. We have seen nude protests across the world. This is not the first time. It happened a few years ago in Uganda with Dr. Stella Nyanzi,
Yes.
propelling or being a great proponent of that. We have seen it in Europe, people demonstrating and the governments paying attention. What, in my opinion, I would say, seeing a naked woman or lady signifies a lot. The woman's body is an embodiment of creation. That is my opinion. That when you see a naked body of a woman, that just shows you the suffering. I don't know whether I'm just being philosophical with it, but a woman's body is an embodiment of creation. Now, if a woman goes to an extent of portraying her body parts, it shows the suffering that one is going through. If a young person is pushing out a message of corruption and are doing it in such a way, it tells you the suffering has been extreme. You have seen placards. Could you maybe term them as maybe an extremist end? In my opinion, I would say no. It's a message that is being pushed. Yes, all of us would hold numerous opinions that it wasn't right or it was right. But what matters? The message that is being pushed, fighting corruption. Our country loses up to a total of 9 trillion Ugandan shillings on a yearly basis. But it's still debatable anyway. Or, because Uganda is this country that always wants to depict itself as a moral state. But are we moral anyway?
But Mr. Drake, I will first of all say it is an issue of discipline.
But
it is an issue of discipline. It is an issue of discipline. If you're protesting against something, if we had a disagreement here about what we are debating about today, and I strip off my clothes, will it send my message? I'm asking, will it send my message?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. So I think it goes back to discipline. You're fighting a good war, everyone is applauding it. But then along the way of your fight, you get indisciplined.
I just want to quickly respond to that, but I am a moderator. Let
me give you some perspective on that. One of the people I admire the most on this continent, Nelson Mandela, in Long Walk to Freedom, he talks about how peaceful means had failed. They tried all peaceful means to try and end apartheid, and they failed, and so they resorted to violent means. And we know what came as a result of that.
And even Machiavelli, in his books, talks about that.
Yes. So, yes, well, for this particular context, if you stripped yourself, I don't think we would concentrate on the message. But in certain contexts, you have to ask yourself, what do we do if the peaceful means have failed? We have tried diplomacy, we have tried to negotiate, and they fail. And then you resort to violent means, and then that's when the government is like, oh, okay, let us try and now sit and negotiate. Then your ends have been met. Then your dream of seeing justice being done has been met. So in a certain way, it justifies the violence, or the violent extremism. I mean, South Africa was bloody. It was a bloody situation.
I know.
The whites, from both sides, the whites killing and the government killing the blacks, and the blacks killing the whites. And then, of course, you have Mandela going to prison for 27 years, well knowing after his violent actions, he was still ready to go to prison for 27 years of his life in order to meet his end. So sometimes and that's really, it's a very funny debate, but sometimes when the conditions are hard and things are tight, sometimes there's a need to resort to violent extremism. Well, let me not say violent extremism, but extremism. And
so where then do we draw the line? Because now that is where we are right now. So where do we draw the line?
That is where we are. That is where we are now. And for me, when you study the Middle East specifically, there's a lot of foreign interference. When you look at in the Arab Spring, it was a myriad of things that eventually led to in Tunisia. What sparked off the Arab Spring was that someone, I think, was protesting against bread or something, and then he burnt himself.
Yeah.
And then that sparked off violence. It's not that there was no starvation before.
And the government was overthrown.
Yes. So that there's no starvation before, but this extreme thing inspired people to take matters into their own hands and act. Now there's extremism, which is regarded as bad, which is terrorism. And sometimes you have to, when you go down into the context of things and try and see who's bad and who's not, the US, for example, which will say that terrorism is bad, will be the same people that will pass a bill or an act that gives the executive powers to commit all sorts of human rights violations in pursuit of their fight against violent extremism. So using violent extremism to fight violent extremism. And that's what led to the to Guantanamo Bay, where some of the most gruesome torture acts had been committed.
Vietnam.
Yes. Vietnam.
Afghanistan.
And if you study the minds behind Vietnam, the late Dr. Henry Kissinger, he one of his beliefs was that sometimes you do need to kill people in order to achieve certain ends. That was his belief, and he wasn't shy about it.
Okay.
So it's interesting. I guess what you'd say is that for those in leadership and for those who hold a certain influence, I think we should always aspire to do good and be good. Otherwise, for people involved in a struggle, you're not going to tell them which means is right. As long as as long as they see what they are doing as a means to achieving what they want, they will continue to do it. So you're not going to tell someone who's starving that, no, please don't use violent means. It's a very hard issue to deal with.
All right.
But
So just quickly go for a short break. But when we come back from the break, I'll start with Patricia. I want you to ponder. Governments could be potential hotspots of violent extremists, in my opinion. You've used the example, the United States has also oftentimes justified their actions in terms of what happened in Vietnam, Iraq. What happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, they were fighting terrorism. So they were right in their actions to kill. Even civilians were counted as collateral damage. African leaders could as well argue the same. You have leaders who have come into power through killing, and they're trying to propel their own ideologies into taking power. So where exactly do we then draw the line? Because we have seen that leaders are actually the big propagators of violence extremism. So where do we as young people come in? Because I'm going to use the example of the 27 guns. These are young men who joined President Museveni to join him in the Korea War. Young, able men. Why young, able men? Because they bought the idea, and look at where they are now. Could we maybe term that as violent extremism? So moving forward, where do we see ourselves as young African leaders, young Ugandan leaders, propelling this nation forward to maybe achieving sustainable peace? Let's just go for a short break. Be right back.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from the break. Just before we went into the break, we were talking about countering violent extremism and the youth's perspectives. Just before we went into the break, I asked Patricia a very critical question, but maybe just as a quick reminder and giving context to it, I gave you an example of leaders. Look at leaders. Are they like the major? Are they the major actors in trying to propel violent extremism? And where exactly, maybe even, do we have to draw the line?
Thank you so much for that question. In the discussion of leaders, I would like to take us back to our first session when I mentioned this violent extremism comes from two aspects. One, they have the aim to transport their message. And this message is aimed towards citizens and the government. So that means the government plays a critical role in all of this. If we were to look at the Bishop Gates bombing, what happened there is people from Ireland. They had the opportunity to gain power in their country as is. However, they felt it more necessary to push back and bomb London. In that situation, which one would you determine as a terrorist attack? Which one is aimed at a government? Because if as a government itself, this is encompassing an executive branch. These are the people who rule countries or monarchs if they're not democratic. So why not aim for the top if you desire change? Because their aim is to send a message or to bring their policies on board.
Perfect. Jones, I would now like us to take the conversation to the role of youth, particularly their initiatives in trying to counter violent extremism. I'd like you to help us maybe cite out a couple of youth initiatives that we're seeing that are trying to promote sustainable peace in our communities.
Oh, thank you very much. I will take you back in, I think it was around 1880? When these young men decided to go to the bush.
1980.
I think 1990.
1980.
Yes, it was 1980. And these were young men. There were 41 of them, right? There were 41 of them. They decided, they felt like they were not satisfied with what was happening then. Yes? So they decided to go and fight against the government. But if you look at one of the weapons they had, was that at the end of how long they would fight, they had hope that at the end of the day we shall be able to get what we want. They fought until 1886. They fought for 6 straight years until when they got what they wanted. So I would say yes, these youth, we have something to do to mitigate what we feel it is a challenge to us in our societies. I would give an example today. However, things have changed over the years. Things have changed. We need to agree to that. But I would give an example of Robert Sentamu Kyagulanyi. I am not his fan. I'm not his supporter, but I appreciate what he has done for the youth. He has given youth hope that however much things can be challenging, but you also have a voice you can add on to challenge the current situation. Yes. When you look at Napoleon Bonaparte in France, he was promoted to a general when he was 18 years of age. He was a young man, 18, but he was promoted to a major general. And he was fighting for the people of France and change, and he made a very great change that even today we sit in history classes. We talk about Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes. There are so many of them. Martin King Jr., he fought for the niggers in the USA. I don't know which year is it.
Bro, that word.
The language is a bit...
But I'm using a nigger because that's what they used to call themselves.
True.
during that time. Depending on the current situation, we should not judge it to what we have today.
It's an academic word at the moment.
Yeah. There are so many youth who have fought what they feel like it is not proper. If you look at recently what we had here in Uganda, protests against corruption, and I think at a certain point, people who were corrupt that me as an individual I don't know, I think they also felt like, wow, this is the end of time. We should reconsider. You understand? So I believe that the youth, we have so many avenues to create change according to what we feel it is not right.
All right.
Yes.
I have an addition to his question. Another youth initiative. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Global Peace Guild. It's a new non-government organization. Its aims entail creating ambassadors of change, ending human suffering, diplomacy, and these are all initiatives in that line. So yes, I would like to be like,
Yeah, but
I agree.
True. There's also, under the African Union, particularly the Department of Peace and Security Affairs in the African Union Commission, there is a department called they have a network of the African Youth for Transitional Justice Network. These are peace builders, and unfortunately I'm part of them. But let me just get to it more. When we're talking about youth participation, youth being a critical factor in trying to promote sustainable peace in our countries, it's sad to say, Uganda as an example, a country of approximately majority are young people. Our average age in cabinet is 65 years old. Young people are sidelined from key decision-making bodies. You move into the neighboring country, Kenya, the same situation. You move across the continent. Fortunately, at least a few African countries like recently, Senegal, Burkina Faso, they have relatively young leaders. But most of the leaders in the continent are very, I would say, old and not young. And that then leaves us in a dilemma that young people are not in key decision-making bodies that would help us propel or promote these things that we're talking about in terms of promoting sustainable peace. Now, so what can we do differently as a continent, but also as Uganda, to ensure that young people are first of all integrated into key decision-making bodies to help promote sustainable peace and development?
Okay. Yeah, there are so many initiatives right now. You've mentioned the peace builders. She has mentioned the Global Peace Guild, the Mandela Youth Mentorship Program. There are so many. So I believe it's about two things. So one is whether we have to first draw the line in deciding the type of leadership we want. And then two, we also have to be strategic about how we approach transitions, because that's what they are now, transitioning from an older generation to a younger generation. When you look at Mandela, Mandela was the first person to go to violent extremism. He was the first person to resort to it. He was also the first person to say, no, it is time for us to negotiate. He was also the first person to to step down from leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, he served only one term. I mean, what other examples should we look to emulate other than that? So the leadership that we encourage should be that I mean, you can know when they tell you, this person has been involved in violent behavior previously, or this person in society is known for this and that, and that's the same person that you're voting for. We should also be enlightened as people that decide which leaders, we push up. The quality, we should emphasize the quality of leaders that we push. Then about the transition, I think it's also a bit overwhelming because when the numbers are a bit, it's almost like a change that has happened out of the blue, I would say. But we should try and be. We have to advocate for the space that we want to take up. There's no going around that. Whether the older leaders decide to give us space is another issue, but we have to advocate for the space that we want to take up because that's what has happened before. We also have to be careful that once we take up the spaces, we do good quality work. I know there's been contention around some of the leaders, the young leaders that have been appointed in different positions in this country. And some of them have been questioned for the level of competence and for the level of ability. But it's also about being intentional, doing the right thing, being competent when you reach those positions in order to provide to substantiate our struggle. When we uplift you as a young person to go into leadership, and then you go there and you're the first person to promote bad policies or to promote dangerous policies, then you're counterproductive to the youth movement. So I would say that also counts in as far as the struggle for youth, for pushing up youth leadership is concerned. But generally, the time will come, or the time has come, where we need to, the guard needs to change. And unfortunately, the longer that the guard doesn't change, the harder the change will be. Yes, that's the way I can say it.
Perfect. Patricia, how can governments and maybe international organizations support the various youth initiatives to achieve, maybe to end, first of all, to combat violent extremism, but also support the initiatives to promote sustainable peace?
All right. Looking into international organizations or non-government organizations as a wide, they actually play a key role in this. First of all is education and awareness. People should actually know that these violent extremists can attack any area, any place. They need education, how to be vigilant. How, you can look at an alert telling you that be vigilant, look here and there, but not giving you protocols. They need to set out protocols. This could also be more with government on how to combat such situations of violent extremism or also post-violent extreme situations. We look at humanitarian access by organizations like the UN. They have to work with the ICRC, the FC, the IFRC. All of them are going to help you in this because once bombings happen, killings happen, people are going to be injured, people are going to be dead, infrastructure will be destroyed. Now we need situations in which people can come in and actually resolve and help the people that are being targeted. So there is really a lot that they can do, and actually I feel like this is now their area to shine.
Yeah. All right. My brother, Jones, as we almost edge to the end of our conversation, I think it's prudent that also you tackle because right now we're looking at feasible but also pragmatic solutions that we can achieve in trying to end violent extremisms. So from a Ugandan perspective, what can the young people do differently to first of all push their message, their voices to be heard, but also end certain actions of extremist behavior?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would say that discipline will have to be a key factor in this. However, so many things that we need to look at. For us, when we were growing up, they used to ask us back at home, who do you look up to? Yes? that is role models. Who is your role model? Yeah, because it is from this role model one will be able to say, okay, maybe this is the journey one will be able to take. So I think apart from discipline, we need to look up to some people. Yeah, we need role models. We need mentorship. We need to be mentored on what this should be done, what should not be done. Yeah, we need the education itself. People need to be educated. People need to be sensitized. The youth, they need to be sensitized. The purpose of peace in our societies. A narrative inclusion. Yes, these youth, we have our narrative towards some issues. We need to be heard. Our voice should be heard. Yeah, should be heard, such that at a certain level, our issues are also addressed. Then, when when your issues are addressed, there's a way you feel satisfied, even if it is not addressed 100%. You feel like, okay, my issue has been tackled. Maybe with time, things will be worked on. Yeah.
Okay, impressive. So now, as we just come to a close, what I'd like first, you give us a wrap up of the conversation, but also your concluding remarks in terms of maybe what the young people out there can do, and generally Ugandans and all people across the continent, in terms of promoting sustainable peace.
As I said, first of all, we need discipline. We need to be disciplined. We need to know God, because we understand that God is the source of everything. We need to know God. We need to be disciplined, and then also we need to look at the effects. We need to look at the effects of these radical extremisms. We need to look at them. If today I went and burnt a certain building because I'm dissatisfied with some people or with something, will that one solve the problem? Yes. So we need also to look at that. As youth also, we need to be considerate. Yeah, because let's say I would use my family. If my dad has refused to give me money today, does it mean that he has disowned me? No, I'm still his child. So we need, I'm using this cheap example to explain a bigger picture. We need to look at so many things. We need to be considerate. As we are being considerate, we are looking at so many things. And so many of them.
All right. Thank you very much, and very happy to have you.
Thank
Patricia, your wrap up to tonight's conversation, and maybe your parting shots as well.
Oh, yes. I'll conclude by saying community engagement and inclusivity is key in this aspect. We'll find that this is all because of dissatisfaction. That's why most people end up in these violent extreme situations. So it's very important that we look after one another. If we have an ability to help or fill up a certain gap, let's do it. As we play our role, government should play its role. Inclusivity, I understand that whenever these situations come about, profiling comes out. And that is a very, I would say, distasteful situation, because you cannot categorize an extremist by appearances or by social status. It could be anyone. That's the main reason why it's difficult to catch them, because it could literally be a child. So I understand that community engagement, inclusivity, and putting a stop to profiling would actually help the situation.
Perfect. Benjamin, you've been very vocal in this conversation, and you've given us very interesting insights. So maybe you can wrap up the conversation and also give us your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Drake. So there's a funny quote that came to my mind about if you've read Things Fall Apart, when Chinua Achebe says, if young people wash their hands, they could sit with the elders. And I believe there was some merit in that you can partake when you're confident enough, because Okonkwo had achieved so much in such a short period of time, and for a young man, it was highly considered, and so he could join the table of men, of elders. But I'd like to say there's so much we can do, but people need to know that non-violence also works. We would have to look at Mahatma Gandhi of India and his non-violent approach. We'd also have to look at Dr. Martin Luther King's non-violent approach, both of which succeeded. Dr. King specifically preached love, which is a funny thing to preach when people are stoning you, people are refusing you to use clean bathrooms, people want you to use the most dilapidated hospitals. It's almost funny for someone to say, no, please love your enemy. Don't hate your enemy. So, but in this case, I believe no one's life is collateral damage. No one's life is expendable. We need to be creative and develop certain strategies and tactics other than violence that can succeed, because our forefathers have done it. They pursued non-violent means and they were able to achieve their goals. So violence always leads to more violence. I would go into a deeper discussion of how, for example, whether the revolutions, for example, if we were to look at Napoleon alone, the way he started is not the way he ended. He ended like any other dictator, So we need to think twice. We need to know that non-violence is also a valid approach that can be used. Then one more thing I would say is we need to unite. We need to unite. Unity is a key factor in any struggle. These days, we are so prone to profiling ourselves. This one is yellow, this one is blue, this one is green, this one is that, this one is old, this one is young. I mean, old people can also join our struggle for youth inclusivity. Women can join the struggle because they more than anyone know what it means to be sidelined. And their struggle has bared fruit, so much fruit. The women's movement has moved tremendously. We should unite and fight for the things that we believe are good and true in this world. That's how it would end.
When all of you were giving your parting shots, what came into my mind is the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, something that we have barely touched on, but for the viewers out there, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy is a policy that was adopted by the AU in February 2019. And the policy framework encompasses on promoting ideals of peace, sustainable peace and development. And the cross-cutting principles of youth participation, women participation, African leadership, Ubuntu entirely, is encompassed and captured in that particular legal and that particular policy framework. So if you have time, go ahead and read the African Union Transitional Justice Policy Framework that gives you all the principles that I think African leaders can adopt, we youth leaders as well can adopt in our day-to-day life, but also everyone else in the continent, but also cross-cutting. I think that document is very timely and very important, and the AU did a very good job in coming up with such a policy framework. Otherwise, it was very interesting having you, Benjamin, with us, Patricia and Jones. It has been a very thrilling conversation. Personally, I have enjoyed it. When it comes to conversations of peace and security, I'm very pumped up and always very passionate about
That's
it.
interesting.
And you guys have done justice to the show. Otherwise, I don't know if you guys have a quote or something you want to say, then you can close the show. Usually, I've not done this, but maybe if you have like a peace quote you have for us, and then we can end the show. Emor.
Peace always prevails.
Anyway, peace always prevails, but spread love, spread the message of togetherness, but also spread the message of oneness. I think we are all human, and we need to love each other. Otherwise, my name is Drake Onen, and I've been your host and moderator for tonight's show. See you next week, same time, same place. Thank you, Civic Space TV, Pal and crew, for making sure this comes out on time. Bye-bye.